Thanks, Riz, for having us here today. What a pleasure and what an achievement to just, first of all, to get all these people in the room together. It's fantastic, and thanks for the opportunity. Daniel Tait from JOLT Charging. We are an electric vehicle charge point operator operating a network of public access DC fast chargers. This is our hallmark product. It's an EVA, which is an internal product name, but 25 kilowatt DC charger. This site's actually out in the city of Knox in Bayswater. And you'll see it's got integrated 75-inch screens, which facilitate our unique model, which I'll get to in a little bit. Actually, before I get to this slide, I'll just talk through, so today I'd like to just run through with you, I've got a couple of points, a couple of insights on EV uptake, particularly in Victoria, which hopefully I'm not going to rehash too much of the stuff that's already come from much smarter people than I today. I've got a couple of, key points that I think we see as pretty critical in facilitating the rollout of EV charging networks in Victoria, and particularly for councils. And then I've got a little case study at the end. But free, fast and clean EV charging. So JOLT is an Australian-owned company. We're headquartered in Sydney. We've got a pretty big network across Sydney and Adelaide, and we're expanding across Australia, particularly in Melbourne and Brisbane, but we're global as well. So our model is pretty unique. Obviously, you can see there, this is our product, again, with the integrated screens. We're advertising funded. So we provide third-party advertising on the screens, and that enables us to provide an offering that I think is particularly appealing for councils, but also private landowners, which I'll get to in a second. But essentially, all CapEx, all OpEx for the life of the contract is paid for by JOLT. So, and we provide a contingent of free charging as well. So here we go again, free, fast and clean. The free charging component is across our entire network. So every user gets a daily allowance of 7 kilowatt hours of free charging per day. So every day you log into the app, you've got 7 kilowatt hours free for everyone. Fast charging, so we're at level 3 DC fast chargers across our whole network. The EVA comes in a 25 kilowatt and 50 kilowatt models. And clean, all of our energy is 100% green power accredited across our entire network. So we've got 7,500 publicly announced sites, that's globally, 40 cities, $750 million of projects. We've got private investment, so we're industry investment in public infrastructure, which I think is pretty game-changing. It's large scale. We're growing really quickly and getting a lot of interest around the world. So we're at the start of our journey in Melbourne. We've kind of grown pretty quickly in the last year or two, but I guess the next couple of years we're hoping to expand our Melbourne network to a couple of hundred chargers, which would be pretty cool. So our offering to councils, I think, is really unique and pretty appealing. It's a very similar offer for private landowners as well, but for councils in particular. We've heard from a couple of councils today that have faced some challenges, particularly around maintenance and installation costs, coordination, that kind of stuff. So our offering is really tailored to try and take that off the shoulders of councils, and we take it all on. So all capital costs are paid for by JOLT. All the maintenance costs for the life of the contract, with a really, really robust service level agreement. We're signing up for 98% plus uptime, which is really unique in the market. We provide a revenue stream, so we pay access fees to council for the benefit of having a licensed portion of their land. All the energy costs are paid for by us. I guess compared to the other charge point operators, we have a a lower connection impact, in the sense that all of our sites are predominantly 1 or 2 parking bays. So far left and far right on the bottom there, minimal impact to car parks, single charger sites, which means a lower impact on the network connection, quicker deployment. Data sharing, we share all of the data that was rightly pointed out before as being really valuable to council. We provide a live dashboard or a dashboard link. And a media allocation. So we've obviously got integrated screens that we generate revenue to facilitate our model, but we also provide an allocation of time on screen to whoever owns that land. So for a council, that might be something like, displaying some messaging like a total fire ban or an upcoming event. And that allocation can be updated. They're all digital screens, so the content is really at your own discretion within reason. Little bit of a segue. I think this is just a really cool picture of new and old. The photo on the right there is from the 1970s as a trial in Seattle, which I think is pretty fantastic and a bit of a sign of what could have been, right? If there was real firm commitment to progressing and developing this area, maybe we would have been here much sooner. But our EVA on the left there, I think that's in a Dan Murphy site in Sydney. So getting into some info on EV uptake, I love this slide. OEMs, the dinosaur juice drinking friends are committing to ending their ICE vehicle production, right? So the timelines there, for those of you playing at home, the Olympic cycle aligns pretty neatly with the local council election cycle. So you can see your election cycles and the OEMs that won't be there to play the game with their ICE vehicles. They'll be all or proportionally removing their ICE vehicles from their fleets, which is pretty exciting, thinking that, Brisbane Olympics, we're going to see some pretty cool and big manufacturers that are EV only or zero emission only at least. I actually recently got a change in perspective on this slide. I had a little daughter not too long ago, and thinking about her future and what that's going to look like for her, and she's going to be looking for her first car just off to the right of the page there, right? So, I was pretty happy thinking about her getting a 2030, a clapped out 2030 model Mercedes EV that's got 250,000 kilometres on it, and parking it on the street and hopefully living in a share house and following in her dad's footsteps of being a bit of a rebel. And it's exciting, but it's also, we've got to make that happen. We've got to make that a reality. It has to be viable. People are going to have those scenarios, and it's exciting to work towards that. So this slide, courtesy of Joel, who I don't know if he's still in the room, but from Department of Transport, he's up the back there. He's very happy that I pointed him out. Owns this data set that's being released by Department of Transport, and it's fantastic. So this slide shows the percentage of EV vehicles against total fleet for Q4 last year. And you can see the darker areas are where a higher proportion of EVs are finding their way into market. Obviously, a bit of a concentration in the inner east, which shows some markers of aligning with socioeconomic advantage. Probably not that unexpected, but then also seeing in the outskirts, there's pretty reasonable uptake happening in the outer suburbs as well, and that was backed up in the last couple of weeks. There's some new data released that Riz knows much better than I, that I think it was a bit over 50% of vehicles sold in late 2023 or all of 2023 were actually out in the outer suburbs, which is pretty interesting. 45,000 EVs registered in Victoria as of Q4 2023. So it's a big number. Most of the councils are seeing over 1,500 registrations, which is pretty cool. And that sort of moves me into the ICE vehicle fleet being in decline. Again, courtesy of Joel's data set. This is a positive or negative for the ICE vehicle fleet between Q3 and Q4 last year. So we're saying that any of the green postcodes saw a decline in the ICE vehicle fleet, which is, a greening of the ICE vehicle fleet is something that we haven't seen before. At least, predominantly, it's been a continuous growth since the invention of the automobile. So seeing people actually getting rid of their ICE vehicles and transitioning to EVs is pretty impressive, pretty exciting time. So Victoria's obviously in a race. We need to balance the supply and demand of charging to EVs. And I'm just going to go into a couple of things that I think are really important for that to happen effectively. First one is transport equity. We've talked about this, a couple of people have talked about this today already, but the importance of providing a network of EV charging that actually tailors to all of the people that are driving EVs, which by 2050, the whole market should be zero emission vehicles, which means that everybody needs access to EV charging, or maybe there are some other technologies during that time, but I think there's a very good chance that EV charging is going to be a necessity for everyone. It'll be an essential service that we'll need to provide to everyone, and everyone needs to be able to access it. So here we've got a couple of points that Vincent talked about earlier as well in Kingston, that the proportions of people that are in living situations that don't enable them to have access to charging at home. We've heard that 90 or 95% of charging happens at home, but we're talking about up to 30% or even more people, depending on your location, might not have access to charging at home. People who rent their homes can't influence might not be able to influence their landlords to put a charger in, for example. People who live in flats or apartments aren't likely to have it retrofitted in there, or are less likely to have it retrofitted in their facilities or not be able to charge at home. And these people depend on it, right? They need to be able to charge in public. They don't have another option. Obviously, these proportions change as well with different demographics, different locations. People living closer to the city in higher urban density areas are more likely to be these people. And that sort of signifies a need to put public charging in those areas. So we did a customer survey earlier in the year, and I think this is a really cool insight from that survey. A third of our customers, so we've got a pretty solid network. I think about a bit over 100 chargers in Australia, and a third of our customers that responded to this survey are saying that they don't have any at-home charging and they rely wholly on the public charging network. Some of them are really good at using their free charging and just getting their 7 kilowatt hours for each day, which is pretty funny. But it's a sign of that those numbers are not unreal. People are out there and relying on public charging. So I think that this is something that is really important, and it's really hard for the public to understand. We've talked a lot about education today, and this I think is a really important one, that the EV charging ecosystem isn't a one-size-fits-all type situation. We sit within an ecosystem of charging that we need a diverse network across all locations to facilitate charging to cover all people in society. AC charging on the left there at home and work, where you don't need to turn over the parking spaces as often. On the far right, where real estate is more readily available, where it's more feasible to get a really large connection for a really high-powered charger in the regional areas and on highways. And JOLT sits in this retail or commercial activity centre space, where the use case of the charging aligns with the use case of the local area. We sit within a space where getting a connection for a 25 to 50 kilowatt charger is viable in a commercial activity centre scenario, and the charging use case makes sense as well. You stay there for 15, 20, half an hour, and that's the time that you're doing already. We're integrating with your lifestyle. You're already going to the shops. You're already going to the supermarket. You just plug in when you get there, and then when you get back, once you've done your activities, you've had your coffee, you get back in the car and drive away. So building an equitable network, I think this particular slide talks a bit to the importance of a diverse network, but also diverse spatially as well. So, creating a big hub of EV charging or high-powered EV charging is going to encourage people to come from everywhere. So, if you put a charger in the middle of an LGA or a big car park charger in the middle of an LGA, but don't spread that demand or the supply of charging around the LGA, you're basically encouraging people to come from everywhere to that one central point. I'm a transport engineer by trade. That irks me right to the core. Think about vehicle kilometres travelled, think about congestion, think about maintaining your roads, think about, as a council transport traffic engineer, how much you'll have to talk to the Department of Transport signalling teams. You don't want to do that. So I guess this speaks a little bit to spreading out the supply of chargers, the diversity of the network, the diversity of the charger types, but also the diversity of the locations to spread it out. If we're going to reach 15% of all vehicles by 2030, which is an interim target, I heard 1 million earlier today. That's huge growth over the 50,000 that are out there today. We don't see many chargers being overwhelmed with demand at the moment, but that's not to say that in the very near future it could be an issue. So distributed charging networks, shorter trips, and supports, obviously we just talked on the last slide about engaging with local economies. And then the other point that we like to talk through is being highly visible. Where the charging industry is in its infancy, there aren't that many chargers out there. And being highly visible, having a charger that you can see from the street, gives a person that's an ICE driver that's driving past that might be considering getting an EV or doesn't know where the chargers are, has that range anxiety, isn't really sure about what the charging experience could be like, what it's like to find one. If you start driving past them, it becomes a non-issue, right? So being really highly visible, being on the roadside, I think is an important aspect of building out a solid network. So survivorship bias, I think, is we went through earlier about the demand and following the demand and building to where we see demand. Survivorship bias, if you're not familiar with it, is essentially, it stems from an issue during World War II where bombers were coming back full of bullet holes and landing and being sort of assessed by people on the ground, and it was, there are all those bullet holes, we better put armour on to cover all of those areas because they're obviously being shot there. And then someone else said, well, maybe the ones that didn't come back were being shot in the more vulnerable areas. So I think in the context of building out a network, it's about thinking about where the demand isn't as well. Thinking about why does this particular postcode or neighbourhood not have any uptake? Why are people not buying cars in those areas? And transitioning their vehicles to EVs. And focusing that attention on making sure that we enable that to happen. And maybe it's a charging issue, maybe it's something else, but I think there's a good chance that we can be a bit more robust in our assessment of building a solid network if we're looking everywhere, not just where the people are making the noise. So the second point I wanted to talk about really quickly was procurement. Lots of councils going to tender last year and continuing this year through EOI or RFPs. I've got a couple of examples from around the world. We've already heard some of this stuff today. But the UK, we've seen, standards and targets come out that are suggesting the number of chargers that are required to provide a certain level of service to the communities. London's twice the size of Melbourne in terms of population, but they're still aiming to have 4,000 DC chargers in the next 6 years. And I think in Melbourne we've got maybe 150, 60,000 other charge points across the city to facilitate that level of service. So, large scale, like really, really big scale rollout with multiple charge point operators, multiple different models, not doing trials, just going to market because the demand is already there. This photo on the right is a charger that we've installed recently in London Borough of Barnet and is live now amongst a few others. In Canada, similar story. large-scale rollouts, governments getting out of the way of the CPOs and really encouraging collaboration and entry to market, breaking down barriers that exist in procurement, committing to subsidies and sort of helping with the funding of the installation of the chargers themselves, but also making it easier to procure using procurement methodologies like previous tenders as a stepping stone to bring new offers to market. So I guess to sum up that procurement slide, we've got time to act. It's happening. The data's there. The numbers are there. We're growing exponentially. We're around 10% of all new car sales are already EVs, and that's growing over and over. So I think it really critical to. I don't know what I did there. Really critical to align with some infrastructure targets. What do we need to provide a level of service to the community in terms, and it might be the number of, this is obviously written by me, so I'd like to see a number of public DC fast chargers per EVs. But in a more holistic sense, it might be AC, a proportion of AC chargers, a proportion of DC chargers. It might be a number of kilowatts, some kind of target that we can work towards and deliver that for the community. In a procurement exercise, I think there's a tendency at the moment to go really deep in specificity on that particular car space is the one that council wants the charger to go into, and then it becomes the operator's challenge to try and make it work. Being open to different models, different procurement different innovative opportunities, different ways to resolve the problem. So a site that might be just around the corner could be really viable for one operator, whereas another one might not be. Leveraging recent procurement activities, I think, is a good one. We've seen this in South Australia where councils have kind of banded together to do a single procurement exercise or use one EOI to inform a panel or a set of contractors to come on board and partner with. And then decluttering the approvals pathways, I think, is an interesting one as well. Understanding, once you go through the EOI, what steps you need to go through to get to deployment. Is it council decisions, community engagement, internal stakeholder engagement, the works, and just being able to understand that and the timelines, and considering where the CPO sits in there. So a summary of all of that: transport equity, create a balanced network. All of the community needs access to charging and is going to need it very soon. Think big and diverse, speeds, charging types, products, different operating models, fulfilling the whole ecosystem. Monitor and evaluate, continue to expand with demand, but don't leave anyone behind. And then in the procurement, setting targets, establishing a minimum level of service, I think, is really critical. Fostering innovation, competition and collaboration, and expediting deployment where we can. So I'll just close with a little bit of a case study. This is you might notice the strapping young lad that's walking past there. I think I've appeared in about 4 or 5 of the photos that are in this presentation. So if you have any modelling opportunities, I'm ready. This is a site that we've rolled out in Bayswater as part of City of Knox. Sam Panther's in the audience and is an absolute champion for being a bit of a guinea pig in rolling out the JOLT network. And we greatly appreciate that and the lessons we've learned through City of Knox. Collaborative site selection process that occurred after the procurement was awarded. So we went through the EOI, responded to the list that was in the tender documents, and then after award, we then went through a really detailed and valuable site selection process where we identify a bunch of sites as the CPO, we work through stakeholders internal with council and refine and whittle that list down to a list of sites that is viable for us and for council, and then continue that through to deployment. The network of sites in activity centres is the key aspect of JOLT's model. So complementing the existing charging locations, no cost to council, providing those economic contributions to the local economy, providing a charging use case that makes sense in the context of the local environment. Minimal impact, so all of the chargers in Knox are a single parking bay, so relatively low impact there. And the 25 kilowatt chargers are really easy to get a connection, so we're in public land, so it's pretty quick deployment. I say really easy, but I don't manage that. There's a project manager that resolved that. And higher than anticipated utilisation. So we're in the outskirts of Greater Melbourne. We'd kind of expected good utilisation, but one of the sites that we've installed in City of Knox is consistently in the top 5 of our most used chargers in the whole JOLT Australia network. Often sees 17, 20 sessions a day, which is really impressive and really great to see. Few points here, over 600,000 kilometres of charging energy, provided to customers over the last, what are we coming up on, a year? 24-minute average dwell time, and 80% of that's free to the community, which is really cool value contribution to the council and the community. That's it.